Hi, and welcome back to Consulting Redefined. I'm joined today by my colleagues, Niki, a commercial and go-to-market strategist, Chintan, an expert in program management for digital transformation and customer experience. I'm Jenny. I'm the e-commerce growth expert helping businesses scale. And our guest, Rohan, a digital transformation leader and CEO of DataFrame, which drives business transformation by empowering CRM with data and AI through services and tailored solutions. In the last episode, we talked about why independent consultants can make such a difference. Today, we're going to get practical with stories from the trenches. We're sharing real stories from the work itself and what we've actually been in, the decisions we've had to make, and what we'd actually do in those high demanding and high pressure situations. Many of those challenges come directly from you. You've told us, strategy maybe looks great on paper, but progress has slowed. Teams think that they're aligned, yet the day to day, those teams are pulling in different directions. And when you're sitting on more data than ever, it should bring clarity, but instead it creates confusion, spin, and friction. We're not here to discuss the theory or the frameworks on this podcast. We're going to go in deep and talk about the reality of running a business. What are the trade-offs? What are the false starts? And what are the lessons we've each learned along the way? Because we have the battle scars to prove it.
And yeah, interestingly, it doesn't seem to matter what industry, organization, or function, we keep seeing the same patterns emerge. And that is that the alignment drifts. So therefore, the momentum stalls and execution falls short of what the expectation requires. But the good news is you can course correct. And the majority of the time, all it takes is a step back from the problem and look at it with a fresh pair of eyes and a different perspective.
So today we'll walk through a few case studies and talk openly about how we'll tackle these challenges you've raised, what we'd focus on first, what we'd simplify, and where we'd push for change. So let me start with a story. This is a particular situation that will sound familiar to anyone who's run large programs. So a global consumer health company launching enterprise-wide digital transformation. On paper, perfect strategy, ambitious scope, strong leadership buy-in. Reality, complete chaos. The scope was massive. Consumer products, customer teams managing retail partnerships, marketing teams split across digital, e-commerce, healthcare professionals, and then HR, supply chain, R&D. Every function had their own priorities, their own budgets, their own timelines. And here's the thing. Each one had a different definition of what digital success actually meant. So what was happening? Six functions working in complete isolation, some moving fast. So you had your e-commerce teams which already had the digital DNA. Others were moving slowly. Say, for example, legacy supply chain processes, legacy thinking. Leadership wanted synchronized rollout across EMEA and global, but they had zero visibility into actual progress. Functions were proposing lighthouse projects, pilots, but the decision making on funding and scaling was glacial. Everything was fragmented, expensive, and not connected to the overall business strategy.
So the strategy was solid, but execution was broken, Chintan.
No, it's not just the strategy, right? The strategy wasn't even visible across functions. Each function had their own strategy. So you had six separate digital strategies, not one. My role was program management, and the first action was to actually align everyone on the single definition of success. I then centralized the tracking, created a single source of truth for all the work streams, regular reporting on each function's lighthouse projects, early test results. Therefore, with that, I kind of forced transparency on progress. And here's the key. I built the escalation discipline. Challenges and funding asks went to the leadership business planning meetings, not just email threads where they simply die.
So, Chintan, is it fair to say that it was visibility that enabled the accountability and collaboration that was really needed to change the game?
Yes, Nikki, absolutely. See, functions started hitting their own timelines because they could suddenly see the dependencies on other functions. Supply chain couldn't delay because they knew consumer team was ready to launch. Marketing couldn't move independently because they saw customer team needed certain data structures. So the synchronization wasn't forced from the top. It emerged organically because everybody had the visibility. So see, digital initiatives rolled out on a timeline across EMEA and global. There were no major delays. And for the first time, leadership had actual visibility into multifunction digital maturity. Functions started speaking the same language about digital success. Follow-on funding was approved at a significantly faster pace because leadership understood progress. They didn't just hear promises.
But it's a bit of an internal view of digital transformation, right? Somewhere in this project, the actual customer experience had to matter, and they couldn't have just focused on the internal mechanics, right?
So, Jenny, yeah, that's a good question. The core strategy was about digitizing the customer experience. But because the functions weren't aligned, the customer experience was fragmented. By forcing visibility and alignment, we actually made it possible for them to deliver a coherent customer experience.
Yeah, and without visibility into each function's work, you couldn't even see the customer journey, right?
Exactly. You had the digital happenings initiatives that were happening in isolation. Customer was touching one function here, another function there, no thread connecting them. From a customer point of view, they have nothing to do with how an organization is defined functionally. They only know and interact with the brands. So you cannot have a customer's brand journey that's flawless in one area and suboptimal in the other. So the lesson is programs don't need more brilliant strategy. They need relentless visibility. When everybody can see the real progress, not just hear promises, alignment just happens naturally.
Yeah, Chintan, it's so interesting because I have a really similar story, strangely similar, but in the complete opposite direction with regard to business size. In my case, it was a founder-led wellness brand. And the founder was just spread way too thin across initiatives. It was almost like they were running in place. Founder was smart, really ambitious, but those resources were just incredibly limited, both from a people perspective and dollars. They were launching all sorts of things, limited edition products, they were testing new channels, they were exploring all sorts of partnerships, and everything was happening at the exact same time. It was basically just thousands of tactics. And it felt like there should be momentum, right, with all the stuff that was happening, but the brand just wasn't even seeing sales grow.
So, what were the numbers actually telling you, Jenny?
Well, frankly, that there just wasn't enough qualified traffic to support everything that they wanted to do and to support all of these tactics in a real repeatable or measurable way. So with an issue like limited traffic, your conversions and your orders, they're almost accidental or even random. A handful of new site visits or one additional order swung your metrics wildly. A spike up, and the founder thought this particular tactic worked. When in actuality, it was just one additional order. The scale wasn't there to base business decisions on. So hundreds of tactics. Real attribution was hard to find. It was just noise, and it made everything somewhat impossible to keep running. They were running in place. So we didn't know what core levers will grow the business. They didn't have enough qualified traffic to support all of these launches, and they didn't have strong enough conversion fundamentals to turn that traffic into revenue on a repeatable basis. Again, just running in place.
So what did you recommend? More traffic?
Well, not exactly, at least not at first. So, with the little traffic that they had and hundreds of tactics, the first thing we needed was real focus. We needed to find like the two or three tactics that consistently and repeatedly drive sales growth. Identify and strengthen those core levers first. And what we needed to know was exactly who was buying and why. Once we understood those foundations, then we could add in the complexity thoughtfully and back to what our growth targets were, but not until then.
So, Jenny, you mentioned that you didn't initially know what the core levers were. So, how did you manage that? And then, how did you improve the traffic quality and conversion?
Yeah. So the short answer is we had to find them. And we looked and refined where we needed, but we went back to the basics. We went back to the brand story, the core positioning, the point of difference of the brand, the personas that we have. We dug into the data. What were our best selling products? What was our customer purchase data telling us? And then we talked directly to the customers. We looked at the reviews, we surveyed them, and we talked to them. We knew the goal. That was clear, right? Attract higher quality traffic, convert that traffic more reliably, and then build a repeatable system for acquisition, conversion, retention. So stepping back and putting that sales data, the strategic positioning, and the customer survey together, and when we dug in, we found three tactics that were pretty much worth placing our bets on. Sat the founder down and said, let's pause on all these other initiatives. Let's test these three areas and build a strong foundation off of that. Can we build something that's repeatable? Can we build something that works? And once we know we can do that with these simple tactics, then we can move on to things like limited editions. Then we can move on to other channels. We can move on to more.
And Jenny, I think they might have pushed back, right? Because it felt like doing less.
Yeah, they did. But once we looked at the numbers and once we looked at which tactics were going to unlock that real growth, they understood and were willing to take that ride with me. It wasn't about doing nothing, but it was about doing the right things first. The great news is we saw an increase in traffic. It was up 86%. But subscriber growth was over 100% and customer growth was over 300%. And the sales were tracking as well, up about 30%. But what we got was a bit more clarity. We had that baseline. We knew what the core fundamentals were, those three tactics that we found looking at that data. And we said, we know that these work. Now we can make smarter, sort of more confident decisions on where to go next.
Yeah, I can really relate to what you're saying, Jenny, especially the bit about just doing more. Often the biggest unlock is more about getting clear on focusing what needs to work first, and then the next step, and then the next step. I'm also curious to hear, Jenny, how did you actually help them adapt that new core fundamentals to stop them slipping back into their old habits?
Yeah. Well, that was where it got fun, at least for me, because now we get to test how that foundation scales, right? We had this sort of smaller core set of customers. We have three tactics that we know work repeatedly for driving a bit of acquisition and driving that retention and conversion. But can it travel with us? If we funnel more traffic, do those other KPIs, does your average order value, does your items per transaction, does your conversion rate, do those remain stable or does it collapse? And so we built a series of digital media tests and continued to test within those tactics to drive more traffic. If we couldn't make it work in under 3 months, we killed it. We've moved on to the next idea. The process is what works well, but again, only if the fundamentals are solid and then you layer on after that.
Yeah, it's interesting because listening to you both, there's a common theme here of let's throw more at it rather than let's take a step back, understand what's truly happening, especially in today's climate where businesses have limited budgets and resources, but they still have those big growth ambitions and they need to understand how they can stay resilient. So when I hear things like the strategy is solid, the board signed it off, so I just cannot figure out why it's not driving the results. The thing I tend to ask is, does the strategy and action plan ladder back up to the insights and analytics? And then have they got a multi-channel strategy in place? And it needs to be connected. And without those things in place, things get messy real fast. So let me share a situation I came across. It was actually a multinational medtech company, very successful, but they wanted to accelerate growth. Their strategy was solid, but it wasn't designed with execution in mind, and they didn't have that connected multi-channel strategy. And after talking with the teams, what I found was there was a lack of integration and alignment amongst the functional stakeholders, which resulted in siloed operations. And actually, their channels in their markets, therefore, were underutilized, which all resulted in a disjointed approach to the customer base, which then led to misalignment with the strategy and was blocking their growth.
So, all right, you know that the strategy and the action plan aren't aligned. So, what's your starting point then to get everything aligned?
Yeah, so I always start with the insights in the analytics and reviewed and then reaffirmed that the strategies did in fact line back to the insights in the analytics. And then we reviewed and refined the action plan to ensure it linked back to the strategies. And then finally, we ensured the incentives would link to the specific actions that drive the strategy. Once we had that clarity, we were confident that everything was linked and laddered back up to the insights and analytics. We then pulled together the multi-channel strategy and aligned them to the common goals.
Sounds good, Nikki. But what does that mean in terms of action items and outcomes? How did you pull all the functions together and have them aligned to these common goals?
Yeah, absolutely, Chintan. The lack of alignment was one of the main sticking points. So we brought all the key functional stakeholders together in a workshop to establish the shared vision, what the priorities were, and to create a unified approach. And then within that, we also established the lead measures, those everyday actions that really move the needle. We then shared these with the teams who understood how these actions would be taken by them and would influence a positive outcome. So it made it easy for them to embrace that ownership and accountability.
Nikki, that sounds good, but what was the
Mhm.
outcome?
Well, I think we need to keep in mind that now we had a team that could confidently explain the strategy and execute it. And it was really great to see that they delivered 8% sales growth, which was outperforming the category, which at that stage was performing 3.3%. And they grew their market share by 3 percentage points.
So, all right, great results, Nikki. But how long did it really take to get the team to get there?
Yeah, I understand why you asked me that, Jenny, because it sounds like a lot, but actually, it only took around 8 weeks to design. But you really need to have that focus and commitment. And then the lead measures and the team's confidence kept them true. And also by linking the rewards to the strategy, that was a consistent reminder to the what and the why and kept the focus, because after all, in reality, it's how they get paid.
So let's go through a complex scenario, right? This is great so far, great insights from everyone. And with this scenario, say, for example, a $250 million retail company launching complete omni-channel transformation, right? Um, Say a new e-commerce platform, technical requirement, integrated customer experience, which is the strategy requirement, multi-store rollout, headquarter change, program requirement, data centralization for personalization, that's the data requirement. Timeline, probably say 12 months, budget of $5 million, dollars, and the CEO expectation, customer experience improvements in 6 months, right? Revenue impact in 12 months. Internal team is overwhelmed, I guess, and leadership hasn't aligned on what success looks like. So let's all talk about this scenario. What do you do first?
Wow, Rohan, there's a lot to unpack there. Right, let me start by playing devil's advocate and suggest that this isn't actually an omni-channel transformation problem, but more a leadership clarity problem disguised as a technology problem. When you think of it, a new e-commerce platform, data centralization, HQ change, store rollout, to me, those are actually the outputs. The real question we need to ask is what is the commercial problem we're trying to solve and in what order? Because what I'm actually hearing is ambition led on ambition without one single agreed definition of what success looks like. And if you add into that mix 12 months, $5 million, customer experience, uplift in 6 months, revenue impact in 12, and an overwhelmed team, that's kind of flagging to me the scope exceeds capacity. So what would I do first? So I'd align three decisions at leadership level. So one, you need to be brutally clear on what your North Star is. If you're number three in the category, what is actually going to move you to number two? And three, is it higher conversion, better retention, increased basket, margin expansion, or even share of wallet? And then make sure you rank them. Don't have a list, because if you don't rank them, nothing will change. Because the reality is actually $5 million, you cannot transform everything at once. Next, I would really need to define what omnichannel actually means for your business, because omnichannel isn't about being everywhere, it's about coherence across the customer journey, I believe anyway. And right now, I bet the customer's feeling pretty confused. There's different pricing, inconsistent product positioning, fragmented loyalty, and I bet store and digital are not reinforcing each other either. And if that's true, the issue isn't technical infrastructure, it's design and discipline. And that's where I would challenge that if your conversion rate is below average and your retention lags behind the competitors with a declining basket size as well, then rebuilding the platform without fixing your value perception and proposition clearly, you're just going to deliver the same results on better architecture, because technology will only amplify your commercial truth as it already is.
Yeah, and Nikki, I'm hearing what you're saying, right? About this idea of building the North Star and then laddering choices about what omni-channel means. Like that's the right strategic framework. And for me, I want to get in and get stuff done. So let's assume right now the North Star is that move from number three in the category to at least number two, right? And the revenue architecture of what it's going to take to get there is solid. Um, but let's also assume that those priorities that you mentioned before are truly the priorities, ranked one, two, three: higher conversion, better retention, and increased basket. It's pretty ambitious, but it's a challenge that can be solved. And like Rohan, you mentioned, and Nikki, you mentioned, we need revenue impact in 12 months and a customer experience improvement in 6 months. So you can't start with everything, and you certainly can't start with centralizing your data and building an e-commerce platform because you won't hit those targets in that time frame. But what I would do is that getting in there is prioritizing the levers that buy you time and ladder to the omni-channel definition. The low-hanging fruit that's going to drive revenue impact or customer experience impact or both, right? And give your team some runway. Right? The idea here is to build a little bit of best practice, quick wins, and get that runway so that the rest of the work can take shape. So where do I start? I'm going to look at conversion funnel. There's probably friction somewhere. Where is it? Fix that first. And then let's look at what's going on in each marketing channel and collectively across the marketing channels. Maybe one of them is driving a disproportionate amount of traffic versus sales. And so we can fix that quickly and course correct. But maybe we have the opposite problem, which is great to have, that we have a channel that's driving higher sales than it is traffic. So a higher percentage of sales than it is traffic. That's a channel that's working for you. Shift some budget there while you fix the other areas. And Nikki, you also mentioned one-time buyers or repeat buyers. So what does that look like? What's the data telling us? Are they new? Does it differ by category? I'm assuming we don't already have maybe an RFM model or a CDP here, and we don't have time to really build one. So let's just pick a lagging metric, fix it, and move on. Unlocking a couple quick wins in 3 months max. It gives your team the runway. It gives everyone the runway to work on those longer term initiatives, to find those unlocks, like that platform rebuild that Rohan, you were talking about. Chintan, I bet you're going to probably talk about that in a moment. But let's just make sure that what we choose and those couple of unlocks are linked to those business outcomes. Give yourself that runway and link it back to business outcomes. And then we can start moving into the bigger projects.
Yeah, absolutely, Jenny. Totally agree with those points. And now we have to address the part that most transformations ignore, and that's the internal absorption capacity. So, thinking about it, if your team is already overwhelmed and you layer HQ change, store rollout, new tech stack, new data model, and a cultural shift all simultaneously, the biggest risk isn't actually technical failure. Your team will just be totally fatigued and disengaged long before the system will actually fail. So my recommendation, and it goes back to what we've talked about before and is a clear theme here, is my recommendation would be less activity, more coherence with clear gates, clear ownership, and invest in a great project manager.
So, Nikki, what would you do first?
I would align the leadership on what winning actually looks like in measurable terms, identify where the value leaks are happening today, and prioritize the 2 to 3 moves that are going to create that commercial momentum for you inside the 6 months. Then you design the transition around that reality. And that's where sequencing comes in and so important.
Mm, I agree. Sequencing does matter. But this here's what worries me the most, which is we are still talking about four parallel work streams, an overwhelmed team. That's a recipe for chaos. And let me tell you what, be very blunt about what actually happens. So, day one, everyone's aligned. Month three, priorities shift. Your CMO gets pulled into to hit the Q2 revenue. Your CTO vendors misses deadlines by 6 weeks. A senior leader gets cynical, starts prioritizing their department KRAs over the transformation. This is normal. It happens in every program I've run. The question isn't whether things go wrong. Who keeps track of it when they do? That's the real question. And this is where program management matters, is to keep the program on course when reality hits. So here's how I would do it, which is the first 90 days, governance and momentum. Weekly steering meetings with the CEO, CFO, CMO, and the CTO. Blockers escalate, resolved in 48 hours, no email chains. While quick wins are being hunted, I am running data assessment and customer journey mapping in parallel. So by month three, you've got momentum and the runway for the harder, the tougher work. Months 4 to 12, this is what will move the needle, not everything. Just take what moves the needle. Most programs try to do everything. You don't need to perfect. You just need what moves you from number three to number two. Platform priorities is unified customer view, frictionless checkout, integrated loyalty. Okay. Everything else next year. Store rollout, pilot 2, 3, learn, fix, and then scale. And then here's the thing that no one plans for, which is when things go sideways. Say, for example, month five, vendor delays platform by 6 weeks. So what? I resequence it and we still hit month 12. Month seven, the CFO cuts budget. So I show the steering committee exactly what gets sacrificed and the business cost. Then take a call, basically. Month nine, the team's exhausted. So I'm running town halls, showing progress, keeping people bought in. That's the value, not frameworks, scar tissue. And this is what matters the most. Not just managing tasks, it's about delivering outcomes. And see, program management isn't about hitting milestones on a Gantt chart. It's about moving from number three to number two in your category, customer experience improving in month six, revenue impact landing by 12 months. And that's what you hold your program manager accountable for, not just the tasks or the delivery, the business results. And then you talk about transition to BAU. That's the bit which a lot of people completely miss, right? So my commitment isn't to stay forever. In fact, none of the consultants will like to stay forever. Yeah, it is for us to leave when we set up your business for success, right? So before I leave, we build the metrics and the dashboards that let you course correct on your own. True BAU means you don't need transformation consultants forever. So, Rohan, summing up and kind of responding to the original situation. See, the honest truth is 12 months is tight, 5 million is constrained, overwhelmed team is a red flag. But here's what makes the difference. When you combine strategic clarity at the top, tactical execution on quick wins, technical infrastructure that enables the results, and a disciplined program management that adapts when things break, that's how transformation actually succeeds. So it's not about having unlimited resources. It's about being ruthlessly disciplined with the resources you have. And that means pausing non-essential work, making those hard trade-offs, bringing in the right expertise where those gaps exist. Not everywhere, but just where it matters the most. Can it be done? Absolutely. But only when you're realistic about the capacity and you've got someone who's lived this before, keeping it very honest. Yeah. And see, and then when we're done, you've got a platform that moves the needle, a team that knows how to run it, and the metrics that keep improving without us. That's the transformation story you want to tell your board.
No, thank you all for providing your perspective and quick takeaway from all of this, right? Consulting partner, having a solid partner on such programs, that's the key. Bear in mind the top two or three priorities, whether it's the revenue impact, whether it's ensuring that you're working as coherently as a team and ensuring that you are not losing sight of the goal, ensuring you are achieving the outcomes, the focus, the relentless focus on the business outcomes and working collaboratively with your consulting partner. That's the value that you bring in and work as one team, right? Get things done. So thank you for all of this. Closing reflections. What do we take away from all of this? What would each of you want someone who is listening to our podcast to understand?
Let me take a shot here. See, look, programs are hard. Organizations are complex, but most failures aren't because people aren't smart. It's because the details slip through the cracks and no one's watching. So find someone who's willing to be obsessed with the details, who will stay with you through the implementation, not just advise and leave. That's what matters.
Yeah, and from my perspective, and I keep banging on about this, this strategy is only good as its execution, and execution requires alignment. So make sure you know why you're doing something, and make sure your team knows what and why you're doing something, and then make sure your incentives reinforce the what. Otherwise, it's just a story on the paper.
Yeah. Rounding that out, Nikki, and thinking about my take on that, it's focus, right? Everything I see is that teams love to add more before they understand those fundamentals. And it's critically important to strengthen that core first, to know what exactly it is that's moving the needle. And it's probably simpler than you think from an answer perspective, right? How does that strategy, how does that execution, and how does that all just ladder up to goals? But if you're not focused on that, then that's where adding everything in is going to make the complexity essentially essentially destroy your focus.
Yeah, and from my standpoint, none of this works without visibility, right? You got to make your data visible. You got to empower and unleash your data. Then strategy, then execution, and customer experience. It all becomes executable.
So if someone's listening and thinking, okay, I need help here, how do I work with you all? What's the first move?
So it's really simple, actually, Chintan. Just pick up the phone, have a conversation with us. We don't need a formalized scope. Let's just discuss the problem, see how we could resolve it with you, and take it from there. It costs you absolutely nothing to have a conversation with us.
Yeah. And Nikki, I think it's being honest about what you might
Yeah.
need, right? Just talking about that problem, but you might not know, and you might not know all of the details. So totally fine. I would say ask yourself this. What is it that keeps you up at night? What do you wish that could happen, but you're just not sure how to make it come to life? We can start there. Everything else can happen after.
Hmm. And see, my point is we are not here with theory. We bring scars from execution, and that means we help you see what's coming before it costs you all of that time and money.
Perfect. Thank you very much, everyone. That's Consulting Redefined, episode 2. You can find all our details in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening.